everyone. Welcome to the Daily Grind. My name is Kelly Johnson, your fun and friendly host. We are on episode 19 of season 2, the very best one yet. I wanted to give a quick shout out to John Pound Photography. We worked with John on our podcast, Brand Photography, and the portraits turned out incredible. He was very professional, and I enjoyed the entire photo shoot experience. I would highly recommend him for anyone needing quality portraits. If you are located in the Milwaukee area, reach out to John at johnpoundphotography.com. Thank you, John. Support from this podcast comes from Savvy Dating Game. Tired of swiping left and right? Try Savvy, the world's first live mobile dating game. Live every night, 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern. Before we go live with our special guest, here's your Kelly Fast fact of the day. Apple pie isn't actually American at all. The next time you call something as American as apple pie, you might consider the fact that neither apple pies nor apples originally came from America. Apples are in fact native to Asia, and the first recorded recipe for apple pie was actually written in England. There's your fast fact of the day. So we'll get this party started right away. I'm going to introduce our special guest onto the show. We have Lauren Andraski, is quite the innovative social change maker. She's the program director for the Bosner Center for Development and founder of Consultants for Good. Lauren lives and works in Denver, Colorado. So welcome to the show, Lauren. It's really great to have you on the podcast today. I probably butchered your name or your last name at least, but we'll just keep the ball rolling. So can you tell our listeners, if they haven't came across you already, who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Sure. Well, it is a common occurrence to pronounce my last name wrong. I'm Lauren Andraski. I currently live in Denver, Colorado with my husband and our dog, Luna. My husband and I are both originally from southern Wisconsin, just outside of Madison. Now I'm the program director for the Posner Center for International Development, another name that everybody says wrong, and the founder for Consultants for Good, a group that I've been able to facilitate for the last 2.5 years. I spend most of my free time in the garden, hiking and camping in Colorado, or more recently, finding ways to be social at a distance by hanging out with friends in our yard or playing a virtual game of Dungeons and Dragons, which I think officially makes me a super nerd.
Oh, wow. You got quite the grind going on. I'm excited to learn more about you and your story later on in our interview today. Love the outdoors, so you're in the perfect spot or great location to do all the hiking and gardening. You probably have a few of really favorite places to go to in your area, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We were just camping out there just about an hour outside of Denver last weekend.
Oh, wow. And you have really nice weather, at least during this time of year, if I'm correct, yeah.
Absolutely. However, sometimes, like a few weeks ago, it oscillates between 97 degrees one day and then snow the next 2 days. So it keeps you on your toes, to be certain.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. So I guess, yeah, going back into your story, how do you first become interested in studying social welfare and policy at University of Wisconsin-Madison?
Yeah, so this is kind of a funny story that's going to sound really off topic, but will make sense in a bit. So my freshman year, I was invited by a friend of mine who went to UW La Crosse to go to Oktoberfest. But what she didn't tell us was that because of the excessive partying the weeks before, all of the celebrations were actually canceled, and the cops were not being lenient and immediately ticketing anyone at a party, whether or not they were actually caught drinking. So obviously, everybody at the party got underage drinking tickets. We were all court ordered to see an addiction counselor. So I met with the counselor and shared the situation and said, I don't really drink. And we continued on to discuss what I was studying and my career plans to use up our time. And when I shared that I was studying psychology, she said, I studied psychology, but everybody that's moved up here studied social welfare. So in reflection, I don't think it would have made that much of a difference. But at the time, I was really looking for some guidance and wasn't sure I wanted to be a psychologist. So within that week, I switched my major and my entire course schedule for the semester to social welfare. And then from there, my focus on policy, I took an incredible course on social welfare policy with Professor Mara Curtis. And I fully expected that to be a really boring recount of historical policies and dates. But she did a really good job of making the connection so clear about what was happening in the world today with the evolution of social movements and policies. So I really was interested in kind of the systems changed aspect of social welfare policy.
Mhm. Yeah, really well said. That's quite the story too. Freshman year in college, you switch your major like within a week or so. That's great. Being able to be flexible on the go, and obviously you're doing a really great job at what you do today. And we're excited to again talk about more on the podcast. But yeah, that's great. Like again, one personal experience leads to another, and then here we are today, basically. Got your interest in what you're passionate about. So what motivated you then to work early on at Epic and other community outreach roles in the Madison area?
Yeah, so while I was interested in social policy, I knew that I wanted to start out a little bit closer to the work. I saw so many politicians and policymakers who were really disconnected from the people that they were technically working for. So as a new graduate, I attended Madison Nonprofit Day, which is still one of my favorite conferences of all time. Huge plug there. And signed up for a one-on-one session with a consultant to ask how to break into the sector and get some job hunting advice. And we chatted for a while, and in the end, he shared that he was actually currently helping the Urban League of Greater Madison hire for a position. So he shared the position with me, and it ended up being a good fit. So I started there, and I only actually stayed in that role for 9 months. I really loved it, but I was also a very idealistic recent graduate who thought that I could change every single inefficiency in an organization within 9 months, and was frustrated when I surprised could not do that. And while I wish that I had been patient, I didn't at the time feel like I had the tools to mobilize and organize to actually make that happen, and felt like my boss didn't either. He was pretty swamped and overworked. So I felt like I needed to search for those tools elsewhere. So Epic, Epic Systems had quite a reputation for themselves in Madison, known for hiring young people to work a lot of hours and burn out quickly, but also for training expert project managers. So I thought that instead of going back to school, why don't I instead get paid to gain this experience in project management and then donate a percentage of my much higher corporate income while I worked there? So still having some way to have a connection with the nonprofit space. And I knew that I wasn't going to stay at Epic long term, but I was able to get some really critical and effective project management skills while I was there. And I don't know that I'd actually be in the position I'm in now if I didn't have those skills. I will say recently, I've been kind of reckoning with what it means to be an anti-racist project manager, and learning that a lot of the core tenets of project management that I learned were based on perfectionism, urgency, worship of the written word, and so on, which Tema Okun identifies as unspoken characteristics of white supremacist culture. So just kind of an interesting area that I'm in now of, wow, these skills help me get where I am, but how do I do that? How do I apply those in a more equitable way?
Yeah, really well said there. I love how you started right away in college or just after college as well. That Madison Nonprofit Day, that's huge. Just being involved, networking, connecting with people. For a lot of our young grads that are listening to our podcast, as well as our daily grinders that are currently in college, things of that nature. So utilizing the resources around you, especially at your university or whatever area that you live in, I think that's really important. And again, number two, you're developing your skills. So you mentioned like your position at Epic. I know a few people that work at Epic currently right now. I've heard similar stories, but that project manager skills, that's something you learn on the job. You can't, learn that in school. So I think that's really important for your career. And it's really cool that you're able to share it with our audience here on the Daily Grind. And then, yeah, I was going to ask about the anti-racism project management. So I probably could ask you, you probably didn't foresee going into that area like 5 years ago. If I asked you that question, you probably wouldn't foresee that what you're doing today.
Oh, not at all. And I think part of it obviously is the more widespread nature of the racial justice movement, and that there are now, I think, even compared to 5 years ago, more visible tools than there were at the time. And I think, for me, as a white person working in a pretty white company at the time, it was everything kind of clicked. So these are really obvious characteristics within project management that are effective. I think the one that blew my mind, I think the most, was learning that worship of the written word is an unspoken characteristic of white supremacist culture. And for me, I'm like, well, of course you have to write everything down. And so I don't know what that necessarily means yet for my project management style and how I'll be able to unpack that. But I think it's worth looking into some of these skills that we see as obvious and necessary, and taking a deeper look at those.
Definitely, really well said. Yeah, it's like just more than just a few words. It's this topic, has subtopics, other categories. A lot of different factors play into this, and it's people like yourself that are in this industry that can help, solve those problems or be a resource to reduce those inefficiencies, like you said. So yeah, so we talked about, so you're in Madison, you're first located there, and then now move to Denver, which you currently live and work. Had a travel sabbatical over Europe and Asia. What was your aha moment in bringing that corporate project management experience to the social impact space?
Yeah, so I think the biggest aha moment of the whole traveling sabbatical, especially, was realizing that my now husband and I don't drive each other crazy, even when we're in the same small space for months at a time, which is proving to be very useful these days. But for project management, that was really my goal from the start. And I think, I was just so frustrated that things were inefficient and there wasn't a documenting system for every single thing. And I realized that some of that now, it takes time to create those systems and to build those systems, and sometimes systems aren't necessary. But that was really my goal from the start of taking the job at Epic, kind of knowing what I was getting myself into there, with the tough work-life balance, but bringing that back to the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, really well said. Again, taking those life experiences or things that you've done over the years and applying it to what you do today, I think that's really important. And again, you're able to share your knowledge with others out there in your industry or even outside the industry too. So, after you moved to Denver, what then led you becoming a social impact consultant?
Sure. When I was in Madison, I was a part of a group called CORE, which is Consulting for Organizational Reflection and Effectiveness. And they supported nonprofit consultants in various ways. So even though I wasn't a consultant myself at the time, I volunteered with them and met some really incredible friends and mentors that I am still in touch with today. And I think, to briefly explain what a nonprofit consultant even is, basically, in my case, nonprofits were hiring me to do whatever services that I had laid out. So for me, I was helping nonprofits understand and measure the impact they were having. So doing kind of evaluation work and either implementing or improving their software systems. So I was being hired, eventually for those two different kinds of projects. So I really liked, when I was in Madison, even though I wasn't a consultant yet, I liked the idea of having an impact across several organizations and focusing exclusively on my core skills. So not getting pulled into work that I wasn't that interested in, but really being focused on what I wanted to be doing. And I think after working at Epic, where every moment was so structured and there was so much required travel, I was really excited about the prospect of having control over my schedule and my work and being kind of entrepreneurial in that way myself.
Yeah, that's really cool. Again, you're able to find what you're passionate about and focus on that. I think that's really important because sometimes during the day or certain jobs, you get pulled in a lot of different directions. And I think that doesn't it leads to burnout or dissatisfaction in what you do on a daily basis. But I think you found what you're interested in, what your strengths are, and again, you're in a really great spot. I think you probably have like a really great position what you do every day on your daily grind, which is super important, and that's what we preach a lot on the daily grind here. Just enjoying what you do for work or even outside of work, different activities that you're involved in, things of that nature. But yeah, going back to nonprofit consultant job, I'm so glad you defined what that is. But for our listeners out there that are not familiar with social impact and nonprofit work, can you share some examples of projects and speaking engagements that you've done?
Yeah, so social impact and nonprofit work is kind of interesting. And I think a lot of people, if you're not in that sector, I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about it. For example, yes, nonprofits do pay their employees, but it's interesting because it's both its own industry and it includes every other industry. So what I mean by that is there are roles for engineers, accountants, teachers, statisticians, facilitators. All of those are also roles within nonprofit and within the nonprofit sector. And my focus has really evolved over time too. So I started doing marketing and outreach to potential program participants. I've helped nonprofits upgrade their Salesforce software. And now I manage a dozen programs to support staff of global development organizations. So even within kind of my general interest range, my experience in nonprofits has looked really different over time. One of my favorite speaking engagements was 2 years ago. So I said Madison Nonprofit Day was my favorite conference. I was able to speak there. I actually had to miss a friend's wedding for it, but it was such an exciting opportunity to speak there. And I facilitated a session on how to measure and understand your nonprofit's impact. So those are kind of a general sense of the types of nonprofit and social impact work that I've done over time.
Really great experience too. Super cool on you, the best of the best Madison Nonprofit Day, and you're one of the speakers there, which is great. Again, it sounds like you really enjoy your job, and I think it's really important. And also, you're taking us behind the scenes of a nonprofit and what it all involves and things of that nature. So I think it's really important because a lot of people out here are just more in the corporate setting. I myself work in corporate, but I think it's really cool to see what goes on in a nonprofit and what you can do with the people that are on your team. Again, going back to your skill set, what have you used your past experiences in Madison, those speaking engagements, other projects, and your move to inspire you to now start Consultants for Good?
Yeah, so CORE, that group that I belonged to in Madison, was easily my primary inspiration. So I moved to Denver. I started a consulting business, reached out to my mentors in Madison, but I was really looking for ongoing discussions with folks that were here, some resources, and some more community here in Denver. So I, on LinkedIn, was connected with another nonprofit consultant in Denver. And basically, I reached out to him and said, hey, these are resources that would be helpful for me. I'd like a community. Would this be helpful for you too? And he said yes. And so we had our first meeting. One of the challenges as a consultant is the feeling that you always have to be the expert and you're in competition with the other consultants to get nonprofits to hire you. And it was also a little bit lonely working alone, even though my husband, who's never done nonprofit work, was very happy to listen to me rehearse presentations, for example. There were several times that he would ask me, so will the audience know that word? I'm like, I don't know. I really hope that they will. And I was looking for somebody who had a better sense of the work that I was doing. So I wanted to create a space to ask stupid questions like that and to cultivate abundance instead of scarcity, which really feels like what we've created now. I mean, I see several times a week there are requests for proposals or offers to refer other consultants to a client. Really a big shift from what I saw at the beginning. And I rely on expertise from the group to lead sessions on what members want to teach and learn. And several consultants have actually partnered and collaborated on larger projects that they met the other consultants through the Consultants for Good network. Mm-hmm. And we started meeting in the basement of a Denver coffee shop who gave us some free space. And like everybody else, obviously, we transitioned to meeting virtually in March. And that actually opened up a huge opportunity to expand us beyond Denver. So 2.5 years later, we are now a global community of 220 nonprofit consultants.
Wow, congrats. Going global. That's huge. I was just gonna ask what audience that you serve and if you had like a space. That's so cool. Again, going back to networking and building those relationships. And you were a perfect example to share on our daily grind. You were able to network on LinkedIn, someone local in your area, and just have the snowball effect kind of go from there and build off those relationships. And here we are today on the daily grind, which is super cool. Do you have a team then with Consultants for Good? How's your organization set up?
Yeah, so it's me. I'm the team. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later too, but I do this on the side of my day job. And luckily my day job is pretty flexible at the Posner Center, but yeah, I have recently asked for some help to manage some things as we're expanding quicker than planned. But yep, it's just me, just volunteering.
Very nice. So yeah, your latest and greatest Consultants for Good. So you're finding this with how do you find that balance then? Being a program director and also the founder of Consultants for Good.
Yeah, one of my first bosses in college gave me the advice to fiercely protect my free time, and I wholeheartedly abide by that. As I said, I mean, I'm so fortunate that my primary role as the program director has so much flexibility, and I think if I were in a role that was more strict on the specific hours that I was working, it would be harder. So I think that flexibility helps. But I've also recently stopped trying to find a perfect balance between the two and to be really transparent. So when I started at the Posner Center in 2019, Consultants for Good was just reaching 100 members. It still felt relatively small, but recently the group has grown more quickly and the demand seemed to be a bit higher. So as I really want to prioritize my work at the Posner Center first, which leaves me with really sporadic availability. I mean, some weeks I may have a few hours. Sometimes it might be months before I get to my email. And I just let Consultants for Good members know what to expect and have started to ask for help. So that way I am not constantly missing those expectations. I've really set those up now for myself up front with folks so that if they don't hear from me for a month, they can give me a call and they're not surprised by that.
Yeah, I think it's good to have that trust and build that relationship again. Going back to those relationships, being transparent, I think that's really important. Being honest with who you serve and vice versa. I think it just builds that balance a lot better. And again, it sounds like you're doing a really great job of staying organized and being flexible. I think those are really important traits, along with a lot of different characteristics that you have in your skill set, which is really important. Do you have any advice for our listeners in regards to finding that balance?
Yeah, I think it's okay to say no and set boundaries and be really transparent about what those boundaries are. It's a journey that I'm currently exploring myself, but I think it's really critical to get clear on what's most important to you and stick to them without guilt. I used to feel really guilty if I wasn't attending as many nonprofit events as my peers. There's a lot of evening events, every organization has them. And it felt like, man, they must be having way more of an impact than I'm having because they go to everything. But when I really dug in and looked at it, me showing up to an extra gala or even an educational working event was not having that much more of an impact than I would if I wasn't going to that event. And frankly, I really love my free time and don't love compromising that too often. So I've just found other ways to be helpful in this scenario where, hey, I'm not going to be able to attend, but I'd be happy to share the event with other folks or share it on Facebook or whatever. And letting go of that guilt then that used to come with not being as busy as some of my peers. There's not a trophy for being the busiest person. So doing that and setting really clear boundaries has really made me so much happier in the past few years. And if there are any bosses listening to this, give your employees the freedom to manage their own schedules because they know themselves best, and don't fault anybody for being less busy than their peers.
Really well said. These are really great takeaways for our listeners out there on the daily grind. Actually, a question on the nonprofit side. You mentioned the workshops, things of that nature, like Madison Nonprofit Day. Is it during this time? Are those events for nonprofits? Are there in-person events available at this time, or they're still just virtual?
It seems like there are some organizations that are still doing some in-person events, which I personally think are highly ill-advised. But for the most part, everything is virtual. And it's been neat to see kind of the innovative ways that we can still do virtual events. I'm a huge proponent of Zoom breakout groups and telling people in advance that there will be breakout groups, because then people are paying attention, they're listening for what they'll have to actually talk about, but you're not putting them on the spot in a big meeting that makes it more difficult. And we can all access online recorded webinars. So I think really for that increased engagement, using the breakout groups where you can. But for the most part, everything is totally virtual.
Yeah, that seems to be the trend currently across different industries, or with previous guests that we had on our show so far in regards to speaking engagements, or tuning into those webinars, or a lot of events going virtual at this time. But I think down the road, things will eventually start to open up. We're seeing it in a couple different areas. Myself, we're hosting a turkey trot. The one in Wisconsin's in person, but the one in Illinois is virtual at this time. So we're hoping to see both in person for 2021. But going back to, I think you, again, those key takeaways. Setting clear boundaries are really important, especially during this time when people are working remotely. So again, just having that balance, being able to, take breaks when needed, which is awesome. So those are some key nuggets, I guess, for this episode. But speaking of all the advice and recommendations, projects that you're working on, can you share with us recent success stories from working in social impact and nonprofits?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest successes are ones that lead to internal organizational change. And one thing I'm really passionate about is pay transparency, which is proven to virtually close the gender wage gap. And hopefully we'll find also the racial and other wage gaps too. So at the Posner Center, we have a job board. And in July, we officially announced our policy to only post jobs that include pay information. So commensurate with experience does not cut it anymore. And as our community is made up of over 200 organizations, that has such huge potential for the global development community. And I think in the past 6 months, just seeing the work that the organizations in our community are doing, they've been so creative and resilient. And it's been really beautiful to facilitate collaboration between these organizations doing totally different work. So having a greater impact through direct food donations, which they've never done before, mailing workbooks to students who don't have a strong internet connection so that they can still participate in virtual school. So it's been really neat to see how organizations are shifting now and still able to have an impact instead of just waiting it out and hoping to go back to the way that things were before March.
Yeah, really well said. I think just being creative, and at this time, it's a really fast changing environment. A lot of things week by week, you can see different things opening up, different programs. That's really great to hear on different like food donations, or again with the remote learning in some cases, being able to send those resources so kids have the opportunity to learn. Again, we promote higher education and people to achieve their personal and career goals down the road. So I think those are really great stories that you shared with us. So, Lauren, we talked about your daily schedule. What's on your daily grind in the upcoming months later this year?
Yeah, so at the Posner Center, I'm really excited. We recently launched the start of an ongoing program on decolonizing global development to learn and implement more equitable and less white savior ways of doing our work, which is really exciting that we're taking that on. At Consultants for Good, we're also working on applying a stronger equity lens to our work and continuing our global expansion. And then personally, I'm focusing on getting our dog to stop lunging at squirrels when we go hiking. So I will take any tips from people on that because that's not happening so far.
Quite the daily grind you got going on later this year. So good luck to everything that you do, and good luck to teaching your dog. Oh, that's great. I don't have a dog, but yeah, I give you so much kudos there. Lauren, do you have a word of the day to motivate our listeners out there?
Yeah, no is a complete sentence. And now is a really good time to practice setting whatever boundaries that you need for yourself, whether it's on a personal level, a professional level, whatever boundaries you need to set. It's a really good time to practice them when there's a lot of reasons to have potentially higher boundaries than normal.
Really well said. I think it fits perfectly with today's episode. Just, setting those boundaries we talked about earlier on the interview, just being able to save that free time or optimize that time. Don't get burnt out. Enjoy what you do. It's your daily grind. So make sure to, live and breathe what you want to get out of life and what you want to achieve. I think that's really important. I think Lauren addressed it in a lot of the stuff that we talked over today. So last but not least, Lauren, if listeners have questions, comments, they want to get in touch with you after the podcast, how can they do so?
Yeah, listeners are welcome to send me an email at lauren.andraski@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. We'll put Lauren's contact information in today's show notes as always. Thanks again for tuning in today's episode. A big thank you to Lauren for being on the podcast. Hey Daily Grinders, we have an Instagram contest with Savvy Dating Game for the month of October. Head over to @DailyGrindPod to enter and win a Savvy Dating Game prize pack and Target gift card. Let's give a quick shout out to our Daily Grinders listening to us on the pod or have been grinding with us since season 1. Feel free to check out our journey so far and share your feedback with us. Give us a rating and quick review on Apple. Virtual high five to you in advance. It's the find The Daily Grind, follow us on Instagram at Daily Grind Pod and on Twitter as well. Check out our website at www.kjfwi.org. Daily Grind Pod, official podcast of the Kelly Johnson Foundation. Until next time, my name is Kelly Johnson. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me, Kelly.